Hello, everyone. Welcome to the penultimate talk in Art Basel Hong Kong's conversation program in 2022, happening on the eve of the fair's opening. And for those of you who can't be with us, hot tip, the online viewing rooms are fantastic and they have exclusive online showcases mixed with presentations of what to see on the ground. And with that in mind, given that Art Basel Hong Kong continues to operate with a hybrid format of online and physical programming, this talk brings together some of Asia's leading gallerists to reflect on how things are evolving in real time and what this means for galleries working today. And we are so honored to welcome our panel. We have Lorraine Kiang, co-founder of Kiang Malingue in Hong Kong, Priyanka and Prateek Raja, co-founders of Experimenter in Kolkata, beaming in from Venice as we speak, Jasdeep Sandhu, founder of Gaja Gallery in Singapore, and our esteemed panel will be in discussion with Jim Anderson, Singapore-based art collector and patron, who has generously agreed to moderate this conversation. So thank you so much to everyone. We're so grateful to have you here. Now, just a note to our audiences, we have simultaneous translation into Mandarin, and you can choose your preferred audio channel at the bottom of your screen. And you'll also find there on that panel the Q&A function, and we really encourage you to drop your questions in when you have them as the talk proceeds. We'll be monitoring that as we go, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can towards the end. So please remember to enter your questions in good time. And so with that, we have so much to talk about. So I'm going to hand over the floor to Jim. Thank you so much again to everyone for joining us. Yeah, the floor is yours.
Great. Good evening. Thank you very much, Stephanie. I'd like to start out by asking each of the gallerists to talk a little bit about your gallery, its program, and your artists. So could I start with Lorraine in Hong Kong?
Hi everyone, I'm Lorraine, co-founder of Kiang Malingue, a gallery that used to be called Edouard Malingue and just recently renamed itself. We are a 12-year-old gallery based in Hong Kong, and we work with around 30 artists today from Asia as well as internationally. The core of the program is to really represent artists from our region and to create a dialogue with what's happening internationally. So we currently just opened a space in Aberdeen in the south of the island, and we'll also have a permanent space in Wan Chai coming September. It's a project that has lasted for 2 years now. So we look forward to welcoming you.
Great, thank you very much. Jasdeep?
Hi Jim, hi everyone. Jasdeep, Gaja Gallery set up in 1996 in Singapore. 2012, we opened up Jogja Lab in Yogyakarta, which is the art city of Indonesia. And just this year itself, we opened up another gallery in Jakarta. Our primary focus is very much like what Lorraine mentioned, trying to support our artists in this very, very new industry as compared to the rest of the world. We are focused mainly on histories and also on supporting the contemporary artists that we work with at the moment. We try our best to work with institutions and with curators from around the world to try and put these artists on a global platform.
Great. Prateek and Priyanka?
Hi, thank you, Jim. We are now a 13-year-old gallery based in Kolkata in India. Experimenter thinks of itself a little bit like an octopus. So while it does represent 24 artists in the world and the program is internationally focused, rooted in the now, it does several things within its community, which sort of breaks the mold of what a contemporary gallery is expected to do or does, and what the role of an institution is. Given the context that we come from, there is a real gap in institutional structure, so the gallery somehow tries to fit or fill in certain of those gaps. We run alongside the representation of our artists. We run a curatorial intensive called the Experimenter Curators Hub. There's a publishing department with Experimenter Books. There's a grant giving wing called Generator, Cooperative Art Production Fund, and several others. So this is what we do. We have 2 locations in Kolkata, a residency that's recently set up, and a 3rd location in the country that will be announced in due course.
Okay, great. Thank you. One of the questions I'd like to start it out is, with the unusual situations we've had over the last couple of years with COVID and the pandemic and restrictions, and the restrictions that are still going on now in Hong Kong, which are preventing some of us from being able to enjoy Art Basel Hong Kong at this moment. I'd like to talk a little bit about the pivot to online and what were your experiences, any lessons learned or tactics of engaging with artists, collectors, institutions that changed or were demanded by the sort of unusual external factors affecting your specific location. Lorraine, could you, from the perspective of Hong Kong, where you're still, 7 days quarantine to enter, maybe could you provide some ideas about the situation with your gallery?
I think Hong Kong is a very special situation compared to the rest of the world. It makes it very difficult for galleries to be able to have the flexibility to travel. So I would say the last couple of years, we have been very selective in terms of what we decide to do. And so we still decided to do projects abroad, physically, without physically being there. So we work with a partner locally and to realize physical projects. With online existence, I think it's inevitable that we must endeavor in trying to gain more exposure. I think the success rate of this really depends on each gallery's program. I would say for our gallery program, it really is important that the gallery is present when they present the works. It's a personal engagement with each of our artists, and it's a personal engagement connecting with the collectors that entice them to collect our work. And so it's not based on, a strong image, and they can decide based on that. And so for us, the online exposure is necessary, but it's not what is going to change our lives. So after now that Art Basel Hong Kong is happening, we're really kind of relying on people coming to us and personally engaging with us. So it's a kind of obstacle for us. However, I think we are always trying to adapt in a way that is suitable to our own environment. And for Hong Kong, for instance, it's a special case. And I think we must deal with it in its special way. And when we're able to travel abroad, we also deal with it very differently.
Okay, thank you. So Jasdeep, the situation in Singapore, how has Gotcha Galleries adapted?
Firstly, Lorraine, our hearts in Singapore, and I suppose the rest of the world goes out to all the people of Hong Kong, and credit to Basel Hong Kong for carrying on with this very difficult job. With regards to Singapore, I'm very lucky because I have got a very good team. So when this hit, I just sat down and suddenly the team went into overdrive. So my manager, Aisha, and the rest of the guys just pulled together, and they came up with all these little programs on social media, to the point that I thought sometimes we were going into overload. But they put together packages for artists, for collectors, all sorts of curatorial ideas in-house, which was fantastic. I thought that they kept the ball rolling, and this had a twofold effect. One was actually for the collectors, but the other part of it was actually for the artists themselves, because a lot of them just switched off, and they were, they switched off the lights, and there's nothing happening for them. So it was, something for them to look forward to. Questions and answers that you go back, we're doing this program in 2 weeks' time, we want this one. So it kept them sort of like busy. And I thought that was very important, very, very important for all of them. And with regards to how we moved ahead, we had limited success, I think, but the most important thing was actually to survive the period, keep our expectations low, consolidate. The other thing also is that we actually sat down and realized that our in-house program was actually a bit short. With all the art fairs cancelled, we then had to double up. And I don't think we should ever forget this lesson that, as a galleries, yes, we depend a lot on art fairs like Art Basel, but we have to, keep a firm eye on our in-house program to do shows. And we put out shows of the Fifth Passage, which Suzanne Victor started, all those years ago. It kept everything going. It kept the blood flowing. And I think that was very important.
Mm-hmm. So Prateek and Priyanka, your situation in Kolkata, in terms of your pivot to the online space. We had some discussions about that this was probably not necessarily new.
That's right. And that actually, the fact that we are based out of Kolkata now since the inception of the gallery, we are away from the typical the centers in a way, and it was a conscious decision to start the gallery in Calcutta, and therefore from the very beginning we've been depending on technology and using technology to our advantage to actually reach our work out and the work of our artists out across the world. So even before, much before, of course, since the beginning when we had all our initiatives like the Curators Hub or even our exhibitions, it was already doing things online, trying to reach our work out in a way. It could have been a lot more complex before all this became common. We were live streaming things on YouTube, like 5-6 years ago.
11.
Maybe 2011. Right. Yeah, 10 years ago. So it was complicated and complex, but we were doing it anyway. So when we knew that this pandemic is going to be a little bit of a long haul, and it was very apparent from our friends abroad, all that things were closing down very quickly, especially in Asia. We were our team, like Jasdeep, our team, and we got together in a huddle, and very quickly we established something called the experimental labs. In fact, I think by the 4th of April, we were ready to roll it out, and we established the labs, which had about 8 or 10 different initiatives and silos, and the cornerstone of which was something called Generator, which was which we realized actually not just for our own artists who have a supporting structure to work with, but the entire ecology, especially in India, needs something to carry on with, because you need to help the community, the larger ecology, to build that gap. And so we structured this Generator Cooperative Art Production Fund between Experimenter, its artists, and its friends, and we created a kind of a pooled resource to be able to support artists over this period. I think we gave over 45 different grants of micro bursaries over $2,000 each over this time. We also very quickly adapted our online exhibition spaces. We built like something called Black Box, which was entirely online exhibitions, and several different categories which helped our programming going. As Jasdeep was also saying, and even Lorraine was saying, it helped us to, the challenge helped us to focus a lot more also internally within our own selves, and to kind of build a solid infrastructure so that we are able to kind of balance this, the pressures of being international at the same time being very local and very rooted to our own city. And because of the international nature of our program and lots of visitors come always, we established the experimental residency in this time that we didn't do the art fairs. We, in fact, the resources that we would deploy in doing the art fairs helped us to buy an entire residency and build it from scratch, and also to build a purpose-built studio where the artists can come and do work. So this last 2 years, we did that.
Yeah. So I guess to answer your question on online, I think and we've discussed this before, while our colleagues and all of us agree that online is going to be an important space, has always been for people who are remotely based, But this time, more than online, I think to look inward, and I agree with Jasdeep wholeheartedly that it really allowed for many colleagues around the world to look onward, to be able to share outward, and whether online was a medium to share that or not, to look inward was the main sort of focus.
Excellent. I mean, I think one thing that was quite intrigued by is that all three of you had added a new location, expanded during the pandemic. And that's a real vote of confidence in the Asian contemporary art space. And I'd like to get a clearer idea. Lorraine, can you tell me a little bit more about the expansions that Kiang Malingue has had in Hong Kong and part of the reason why you've done that?
So 3 years ago, well, 5 years ago, we opened a space in Shanghai, and that was the second space. We closed it at the very end of 2019, at the beginning of the COVID, when we were not able to travel anymore to Shanghai. Until then, recently, we were always thinking whether or not it was possible to open again a space in Shanghai. But it's been 2 years that I have not been able to visit Shanghai. And so it was clear that we had to think of another solution. And we thought about other cities in Asia. But then at the end, with all these travel restrictions, we thought that we might as well get another location in Hong Kong and in a way double down on our own city. Whether or not it's a wise thing to do, I think most people might think it's a huge risk that we're taking. But I think that in the long term and also for the program, there's not actually any better city that can be a good choice for us. And right. I think the most important thing is the growth of the program itself. And the easiest for us to realize that is to be based in Hong Kong. So, yeah.
Excellent, excellent. And Jasdeep, you opened also a new space in the past year. Could you tell us a little bit about that expansion and how that fits into the expectations and plans that Gaja Gallery has and building on its traditions?
I think we came across the ideas quite some time before, but during COVID, since we had this extra time, we decided to sit down and think, where are we going to go to? What's the next step for the gallery? And we already do represent some very important Indonesian artists. Ashley, if he's considered in Indonesian, Ashley Pinkerton, Yuniza, Bangu Putra, Rudy Mantovani, etc. Murniasi as well. So we thought that it would be a good idea to actually not set up a gallery there to add to the art scene there, add to the confidence of the collectors there. But at the same time also, we've got a few artists from Malaysia and from Singapore that we would like to introduce to Indonesia. And there is a bit of cross-buying within Southeast Asia, but not enough. And that's one of the main reasons. I think the gallery's focus long-term is to bring at least this region together, get the collectors familiar with the artists from the region, and also expose our artists as much as possible to the collectors from the region. So I think it is more of a focus to actually try and get involved in the region. That's our first step, at least in the medium term, next 5 years. That's why we need to consolidate and bring in collectors from the region to support the art industry. Primarily, that was the main reason. But it was a bit of a challenge because we did it right throughout COVID. So we got the space without even looking at the space physically. And James, who's our foundry manager, conducted all the renovations, etc., without much problem, I say, and credit to the contractors. So it's we really hope to contribute to the art scene. Then hope to see this region, flourishing.
Right. So Prateek and Priyanka, your space that's been done so far is I understand, is this residency space that you were speaking about. And could you tell us a little bit more about how this fits into your gallery's programming and also sort of propelling you towards the next expansions that you're going to be doing?
Right. So, Jim, I've often said this, that Experimenter works like a collective. So it's not just the two of us that run it, but we have a fantastic team that sort of co-decides on several such decisions. And one of the things that I think we were quite clear about is, in a way, Calcutta and its very unique character draws not only our artists to come and spend long durations of time wanting to make work, stay, explore, but also writers, researchers, curators, and others who want to come not just to visit, but to stay for longer durations. And if there was a setup that we could easily access or figure out institutionally, maybe we would not think about it and we would just sort of facilitate the process. But in the absence of this, right at the beginning of the lockdown, when we would have these daily meetings, I'm sure colleagues all over the world met their teams on Zoom screens like this. Every time we spoke, all colleagues in the team felt that we need to focus on building this resource that could be ours for us to think of a deeper rooted program and a wider sort of possibility of what Experimenter does through its learning program foundation and the gallery. So that led to the thinking of the residency. How it sort of manifested itself in this short time, I have no idea. Credit to the team. Now we have a ready space without even realizing that we have it. And the second part, we wanted to keep that sort of, which is a gallery in another city in the country. We want to discuss this a little bit later as we're still waiting on it.
Yep. Right. Excellent. Excellent. So Lorraine, in Hong Kong, one of the major events is the long-awaited opening of M+. And I mean, I know for at least myself, I'm very eager to be able to go and actually visit M+. I was fortunate to visit the M+ pavilions while the construction was taking place. But that's a really exciting development in terms of the arts ecosystem in Hong Kong. But the mandate of M+ is really quite aligned with that of your gallery's programming in terms of international art from an Asian perspective. And I'm curious about how this opening and the impact on the art ecosystem is also having an impact from your point of view on Hong Kong galleries and the commercial part of the art ecosystem in Hong Kong.
I think the M+, I welcome everyone to go visit. It's really an extremely impressive project that I'm very proud of. And I think the key thing about having such an institution is that it really boosts the confidence for galleries to be rooted in Hong Kong. There has been lots of discussion because of COVID of whether or not Hong Kong should still remain as a strong city for Asia, as an art hub. And I think that having the M+ is one of the key things that will anchor the city in the very long term. And when you establish an institution like this, it takes decades for things to really flourish. And since it has opened just 1 year, almost 1 year ago, it's just the very beginning. But there's so much that can come out of it. And this is not just about visual arts, it's about cinema, it's about performance, and it's very wholesome. And I think this is hugely lacking in our region. And it's something that can benefit not just Hong Kong, but the rest of Asia. And so I think for galleries, for commercial galleries, it's definitely beneficial to us. We can always, try to time our exhibitions to coincide with the institution. Having another institution and having more curators be more engaged with what local galleries are doing is essential to bringing our artists to their next stages. And they're looking, at not just what's happening in Hong Kong, they are looking everywhere around Asia, what galleries are doing. So yeah, it's great.
Great, thank you. And Jasdeep, the Singapore Art Museum has opened a space actually in the same building as your gallery. And I'm kind of curious about the impact and engagement with institutions, whether it be SAM or others, in terms of the role of those, as well as sort of the roles of private commercial galleries vis-a-vis these institutions.
Right. Well, it looks like the mountain has come to Muhammad. Just kidding up. We're very, very delighted that they moved in. They have been contributing to the art scene for decades, and they have a very, very strong focus on Southeast Asia, which I think is probably the only institution in the world that has as strong a focus as they do. And to be alongside them is delightful. One of the benefits is that the curators actually visit us a lot more often and check in on what we are doing, and hopefully they find something interesting. But that said, the gallery's focus is actually trying to reach beyond the region, trying to get some of our artists some exposure. And we've had some success with Hong So and the Burmese artists at Centre Pompidou, Sharjah Biennale doing some work with Samsa Siahan, Carnegie Biennale doing something with Murniasi. So all these things are very, very positive. And getting the recognition from the institution, like the Singapore Art Museum, actually helps us to leapfrog towards other institutions around the world. So yes, we look forward to greater cooperation with the institutions, the Singapore Art Museum, and all the institutions. We recognize their great importance in this part of the industry, and we hope we can do something, we can contribute to the corpus of knowledge and curation that they are trying to create.
Great. Now, Prateek and Priyanka, we've discussed that the government's role in contemporary arts in India is far less prevalent than the examples of M+ in Hong Kong or SAM in Singapore. But I'm curious about your engagement with private institutions as well as the activities that you've done in terms of building an archive that's available for research, going to sort of fill this space that's not really being addressed by, government institutional infrastructure.
Right. So yeah, exactly right. As you pointed out very correctly, the Indian government, the Ministry of Culture, is less focused on the contemporary scene in a way. So institutionally, we have one major private institution, the KNMA, which is the Kiranada Museum of Art. And Kiran is an incredible force. She single-handedly is actually being able to capture this contemporary moment as well as historical moments through her collection, as well as building the future institution. And a building designed by David Ajay is actually underway right now in New Delhi, which will possibly open in a few years. It's an incredible initiative. Apart from that, there is not much institutional support, except, of course, there are new public foundations that are like privately held public foundations, in the sense that they're private foundations, but they're for the public, that are coming up in India. They also, I guess, realize the importance of using arts and culture to kind of talk about the time and represent what we live with. And there's, of course, the Kochi Biennial, which is a large organization growing and very significant in the biennial circuit. What has happened over the years with the archive building of ours, as I said in the very beginning, we started from a remote kind of a location, in a way where we are away from the center. So we built a digital archive of what we do from the very beginning. So the Experimental Curators Hub, for example, which has now will be its 14th year or 13th year, has detailed archives of curatorial conversations, and we've had the fortune of having some of the most intelligent and some of the most incredible minds in curatorial practice in the world who have come to Calcutta. And we have from the very beginning accurately and very systematically documented these conversations. And then they've become public archives from the very beginning. So they're available to be on our YouTube channel, I think Vimeo or YouTube channels or on our websites. But also alongside, we have had a very active programming in the city and in the gallery. So we've built those archives within the program. So no exhibition is complete without conversations, without discussions, without discourse. Then at one point we started the Experimental Learning Program Foundation, because we realized that institutionally that education in the arts, or how does a gallery change from being a passive space of viewing to an active space of engaging. So that pivot happened at a certain moment in, I think, 2018, we started the Learning Program Foundation. And that is actively engaged in building very specific course modules for short durations between as little as 3 days to 15 days, where we invite people from all kinds of artistic practices, whether they're artists or curators or writers or photographers or theater practitioners or contemporary textile workers, to all kinds of practices, to enable these learning program foundation modules. And these are heavily subsidized, so people can just take 3 days off or 10 days off, or do weekend courses in the gallery itself. And these are completely self-funded in the sense that they're contributed by private individuals, no support from the government. But in the absence of such a support, we that's the only way forward.
There are many in the country privately. I have to say, it is not singularly us. It may be for our city, but in the country, there is Serendipity Arts Foundation, privately held by the Munjal family, doing similar work in a very fantastic scale. There is work by the Gujral Foundation, IFA, all of these examples that I gave, or FICA in Delhi, they're all individuals privately running these organizations that are doing work within the contemporary field.
Oh, excellent, excellent. I'm curious, during the last couple of years, because of the absence of the art fairs, there's been a growth in sort of new alliances, such as the International Gallery Alliance, South-South, Ray, or these alternative structures that were explored. And I'm curious about these collaborations that you may have engaged in to stretch beyond your immediate locale. And Lorraine, can you tell us about the experiences of Kiang Malang in regard to these alternative structures?
Of course. So we were involved in Ray, as well as currently International Galleries Alliance, that Prateek is also taking part in. And I think it's a fantastic involvement and dedication amongst galleries to spend the time and effort to work on something that is really about collaboration. It's about communication, most importantly. I think each initiative has a different set of goals in mind. And for example, International Galleries Alliance was able to create a website and to engage in, I think now 200 to 300 galleries as members to share this resource and be able to freely communicate on a forum. We also did a virtual summit. I think these are all amazing initiatives. Whether or not they will continue, it really depends on whether or not galleries are able to keep up that momentum. And it was much easier to have them created during COVID times because of the lack of activity, and everyone wants to be staying connected with one another. And now that things have kind of opened up again, they may become more difficult to sustain because everyone, all the galleries run on an extremely tight schedule. But nonetheless, I think the effort matters. Whether or not it finally succeeds, I think we must at least try. And I think this effort has already proved that something has been done. Whether or not galleries are able to, take another leap once, now that things are back to normal, really depends on the galleries. But it is a team effort. It's not just about a few galleries leading. I mean, every gallery who's involved has to take part, and that is not the spirit of what people think about galleries back a few years ago. This sense of competition is not what these alliances is going for. It is about working and communicating together. So I think it's an amazing spirit to instill in galleries' minds, which I think for smaller to medium-sized galleries is highly necessary for us to survive in the next decade to come. And so I find that it's a great initiative, and we still fully support it. So yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. Jasdeep, in terms of Gaja galleries and involvements in sort of these alternative, whether they be formal or informal relationships or alliances that have taken place in the last couple of years, or how that might have changed.
We don't have much to say about the alliances, apart from the fact that God's my collaborator.
Okay.
But no, we've got the art lab set up in Yogyakarta, and that's a space which requires 100%, 120% effort. James Page, our foundry manager, is running it with, and we invite artists every now and then to come over and produce work and to try and guide them through the whole production process. So we are 100% focused on that. Collaborations with other galleries, etc. Yes, we've collaborated with a few galleries from the region, but we're now more focused on building up our infrastructure within the gallery, getting a broader base of managers to help us develop the gallery, and also mainly to focus on the art lab, which has been working with artists like Ashley and Uniza and Suzanne Victor and Jane Lee, etc. So we're hoping to just try and consolidate our resources within that sphere first before we think of additional collaborations. But yes, we're open to discussion with other galleries, etc. for sure.
Okay, excellent, thank you. And Prateek and Priyanka, I realize that Lorraine has commented a bit about the International Gallery Alliance, which is something that's quite near and dear to you, but perhaps you could give us a bit more of a background or perspective on that initiative and the future of it.
Of course. So the International Galleries Alliance is a unique, incredible model of collaboration, camaraderie, friendships between galleries that was actually, as Lorraine very correctly mentioned, started in the middle of the pandemic, just as two separate WhatsApp groups discussing how we can work together with kind of bleak kind of futures at that moment. And then we got this group together, as there was about 11 galleries, including myself, that we started the initial conversations. And then we also wanted to open it out to a much more wider organizing committee. And then we invited about 30 more galleries to be part of the organizing committee of the International Galleries Alliance, which is quite an interesting model because, as Lorraine was saying, it is a unique example of how friendships and cooperation between galleries, and not competition, but a certain kind of a co-optation, can work together. for the benefit of ourselves, our members, and the wider network of galleries. And today, by far, I think the IGA has some of the most exciting contemporary galleries as part of its membership. And it's a growing organization. It's at the very beginning, we had a fewer numbers, and now it's like at the structural level there are, because it's such a, such a laissez-faire, that's such a free organization. We wanted an organization without, actually we didn't want an organization in the sense, we didn't want structures, we didn't want layers, we didn't want power things, because it's run entirely by galleries. We wanted it to be an open forum for conversation. So we have as Lorraine was saying, a chat forum where we can discuss with each other our concerns. We can share resources. And I can give you a very simple example and a very, very, very prudent example of how this actually planned out. So we just came back from London, where we had our first collaborative exhibition, and the conversation started at the IGA discussions. So Sadie Coles, who's also one of the founding members of this organization, and I was speaking last year during Basel in September about a possibility of doing an exhibition in London, and I said, why don't we do it? Why don't we do an exhibition of Indian galleries in London? And then she said, just use my space. So without a certain kind of an expectation, she just opened it out. The generosity of opening out her major space in Davies Street during London Gallery Weekend in May right now allowed 4 Indian galleries to get together. We then pulled in 3 more. We asked 3 other Indian galleries to be part of this whole conversation, and then we started this exhibition together. It was a grand success. We've had I think the numbers went into the late hundreds for the weekend, a daily weekend.
750 people in 3 days. So
750 people.
Over thousands of people visiting an exhibition, because obviously this would not be possible when it's one gallery's initiative, correct, even if it's the London-based gallery.
And then it allows our programs, relatively unseen in a way in London, to a wider new audience. It brings, and Sadie also dedicated people from her team to sit at the gallery and to have people over. So it was just really, and without the pressures of the trappings that come with going to another city, the stress, the storage, the transportation, all of that. We collaborated everything. We shared the costs of the opening. We shared all. I mean, so it was. This is just one possibility, and so you can imagine how this International Galleries Alliance can become something which is a game changer, structural change in the scene. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. I mean, Lorraine, I'm curious. We've talked about this previously, whether or not you found that collectors were looking at different types of media than they were looking at before the pandemic. Okay, and I'm being very self-serving here, which you know. But I'm curious if you could maybe comment a little bit about what you saw in terms of your gallery, in terms of the types of media that people are now entertaining that may have differed.
So I would say during the pandemic, some artists were working as they normally did, and some were observing what was happening and taking time to produce new work. Everyone was going at their own pace, and therefore what galleries were able to provide to collectors was perhaps somewhat more limiting. And because of that limitation, though, I would say collectors became more open-minded towards things that they perhaps were not so keen on if they were given lots of options. And so because of the limitation in what new works were available, I think, for instance, we did still manage to offer video works to some collectors that did not collect videos. And then some artists, some collectors also looked at painters that they probably were not so interested in a couple of years ago. So they were really keen to see works physically. And so the fact that they are able to experience the work, I think, was already something quite special.
Okay. Excellent. I mean, Jasdeep, one of the areas that we've discussed is the Fifth Passage exhibition that you staged at Gajra, and how that was by many measures the type of exhibition that should have been at an institution. And I'm kind of curious your thoughts about staging, museum exhibition type programming at a commercial gallery and navigating that sort of space between those two areas.
Well, I try and focus on the quality, Jim. We try our best to put forward as much research as possible. If one of the drawbacks for Southeast Asia is I don't think there's any university here that has a dedicated Southeast Asian art history program, which makes our job very difficult, but at the same time also very interesting. So as you mentioned, the Fifth Passage show exhibition was a bit controversial because they got banned in the 1990s in some form or another. And for an institution which is supported by the government, obviously, there are going to be issues and loads of letters that you need to write to get approval. So what we did was actually we paid a lot of respect for the show, as in we didn't try and politicize it, but we tried to focus on the art. And sometimes that's very difficult to do. So we did, and we had some serious discussions with the curator, John Tung, about how we had to just stay focused on what actually happened, what was the art that was produced, and not the embellishments around it. And I think because of that, the artists that were represented at that time, they thought that we did a great respect to what had happened in the 1990s with Fifth Passage. So yes, it's something that we are trying to do our best with research. And research is very difficult to conduct because, as I said earlier on, the tertiary support for Southeast Asian art history as of now is actually minimal. But that for me is an excitement because there's so many, once the research is done, then you start discovering all these gems that you have around. We're trying to do something with Prateek's part of the world with Santiniketan and what happened in the 1920s and 30s as well. There's a great deal of excitement with these shows that we're doing. I don't think anyone in any country in the world, in outside of Asia or Southeast Asia, you'd have that opportunity because everything's almost researched to death, more or less, as compared to us.
True. So we have some questions that are coming from the Q&A section. And one of the questions was specifically guiding me towards what I was planning on asking to Prateek and Priyanka is, again, this question about the medium of the arts and whether you saw changes over the past couple of years in terms of the type of art that individuals were collecting.
I feel I think of it by case specific to the collector in question. I think collectors have a collecting journey, and you start collecting something that sort of you're drawn to or your research sort of guides you to. And then as you go along, and if you're truly a collector and you're not buying to decorate, then you start liking different things. It happens to almost every serious collector we work with over the decade and a half. And I see that they have made shifts at different points in time. I would not generalize by saying the pandemic had anything to do with these shifts happening with people, or the fact that now they were able to see more film and photography works easily. And so they decided, I think it was a moment in their journey which several collectors had time to engage in a certain way. I'll talk about a specific collector. I don't know if he wants me to give his name, but he's a collector based in London of Pakistani origin, has deeply collected a Pakistani artist within our program, has bought almost every major work through her career, but she's mostly known for her film-based works. And he has now collected almost every major work in her career. The next purchase he makes during this time is a 5-channel video. The collector has never, and this is not the only work, not the only artist he collects, he has a very wide collection. So while talking about this individual and his decision to buy a 5-channel video, I can't attribute it to the pandemic, but I can attribute it to the time in his collecting journey and the time that he presently has at hand to review this material.
To pause,
because they're also large, sort of, they're all working people. They all have, work lives that don't allow them to invest a lot of time on things. So I would think the fact that there has been some shift in certain individuals, and quite a number, if you sort of accumulate this number, I'd attribute it to time and their space in the collecting journey. What is more interesting, I think, and I think someone's been asking in the Q&A chat of the mediums collected, it really, at least in South Asia and India, there are many more first-generation collectors. And they're definitely not collecting video to start with, but they're collecting contemporary practice, which is not what their previous generations collected. Because in India, it's sort of common to collect historical works first as you move on along to contemporary works, something to do with the value or other reasons. It's interesting to us that collecting journeys are beginning with contemporary practice, whether it's sculpture, painting, photography, whatever it may be, depending on what their eye draws them to.
Jim, if I may add, I think, what I think Priyanka also was suggesting was most of these collectors, art collectors, serious collectors, they come across photography, performance, installation, and if it's good, they'll jump on it immediately. And I think that's across the board for all of us, that, medium is not so much of an important thing. Most of them has this deep appreciation for art. Yes, so yeah.
Well, thank you. There's a question from Andre Kalman-Stock, I hope I pronounced that correctly, who asked a question that in terms of redefining the market, do you think that quote unquote contemporary art can still translate in these times? Does someone want to volunteer to take that one on?
For sure it can. To use the Singapore term, 100%. It's, as long as it's good, there's always a strong base of collectors that are willing to support good art, that they are lucky to come across. And we can still see a lot of artists producing very good artwork. This quiet period of time actually, to a certain extent, has actually helped some artists sit down and think about their next step. Maybe before that they were just going at too fast a speed. But there's a lot of time, there's been some time for deep contemplation, looking not only forwards, but present and also in the past of what they've done. And I'm sure that there's going to be some really good art that's going to be coming out of this. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. I mean, my own view is I think that contemporary art and the art that's taking place now continues to have a great deal of resonance in terms of our lives and the areas that we're interested in, helping to challenge our own worldviews. And I think I know that when I've had an opportunity to see art after the lockdown sort of opened up, it's sort of like, wow, finally, it's like a chance to breathe again. There's a question which I think is really quite powerful. I said, do galleries, as from an anonymous attendee, do galleries feel that the position of Asian galleries, artists, has changed in the past few years? I think Prateek is unmuted. Prateek and Priyanka have unmuted, so I'll let you go first.
Well, change, I think, change is constant. It's not whether this has caused change. I mean, I'm sure this has caused change. I think as like collectors or institutions, everything was paused and things have, for artists too, it's been also a time to contemplate and reflect on our time. I think it's not really I don't think they've changed in terms of.
Well, I think you're asking in terms of power structures, if I'm sort of interpreting the question. I can't say no, but I don't have a specific reason to attribute to that. Is it that there are more, Asian representation, Asian, South Asian, Southeast Asian representation in major exhibitions, major moments in the world, whether it is about these, industry bodies that are being formed, or art fair representations, or biennales, and major exhibitions that sort of define the contemporary moment. Of course, for the last documenta, Adam Chimchik's documenta, it was a case in point to think about how Asia overall, or South Asia, in a focused sort of way, was represented. So yes, would that happen 50 years ago? Maybe not. Maybe curators were not making visits as they currently are to each of these locations, and sort of their research becoming deeper and wider. But is travel allowances or outreach the only reason? I think it's way too late. If it's happening now, it should have happened 2 decades or 4 before. So it's nothing to feel greatly proud of. It's almost like institutions are making up. Yeah, I have heard several curators tell me we're playing catch up. They're catching up by filling gaps in their collection, as opposed to, so galleries becoming important. Yes, if it's more visible. So in my opinion, it's way too late. It should have happened longer.
Just to add one line to what Priyanka is saying, I think the same thing, and in fact, at a much faster pace, is happening to African modernism, and African galleries and contemporary African art is being looked at very seriously. I know for a fact that the art fairs are looking at contemporary African art more seriously. I don't know whether that's just a trend or whether it'll be something that is going to be sustainable in the future. That too should have happened exactly many years ago. And I think there too there is a lot of momentum, and I think we're just ahead in that momentum, is in a way, but it's happening everywhere, unrecognized, unexplored, undiscovered, as just people are saying. Gems are being looked at again. So yeah.
So it's not a West only model anymore, and that's for sure. So whether it's Asia, Africa,
South,
the South Side Initiative or whatever, it's definitely not a West focused model that will be the future, for sure.
Okay, excellent. We're coming close on time. There's a really interesting question here that I'm not sure who wants to tackle this, from an anonymous attendee. Do you think blockchain and future emerging technologies are able to increase the competition and risk for art galleries to operate? Many contemporary artists are running their own businesses and lack respect for art galleries, I feel, was the comment made. I'm not sure if
I can do this one.
Okay.
No, we just did an NFT show about a month and a half ago, and we had a 6-month deep contemplation period within the gallery of what do we want to do with this, and we sort of simplified it, perhaps a bit naively. We'll find out in due time. That we basically thought that just as an artist can do performance, sculpture, painting, he can do an NFT, and that's the approach that we have. So to all the independent artists that are doing the NFTs, good luck to you, and I hope you do well in it. But as a gallerist, we now provide some form of a platform for our artists to produce an NFT if they want to. And I think, we're not 100% sure, but this is something which we find actually interesting. And the response from the artists themselves, the existing mainstream artists, if I may use that term, was actually very positive. They jumped onto it rather enthusiastically. And I think that was, for me, the most reassuring feeling that I got when our team decided to move, or not to move, but to dabble with NFT, with NFT. Okay. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you. A couple of quick questions. Has COVID, another anonymous attendee, has the COVID push to create online networks and move into hybrid formats promoted the art fair to evolve or instigated a shift in how the galleries work with art fairs? I think we could answer this one quite quickly. I've got one respondent, Lorraine, who's in Art Basel Hong Kong right now at the art fair. So maybe you could speak, and then I'd like to go and ask also Prateek and Priyanka to give a response about what we had discussed in Delhi. Yeah.
Yep.
When you're working on scaffolding
For us, I think it's inevitable to be involved with art fairs. I think there has been a lot of art fair fatigue in the last few years, and now that because of COVID there was a lack of fairs, I think galleries miss art fairs now, and they miss, I think, the sense of togetherness. I think art fairs are able to bring people together, and I think that is something that's very special with art fairs. So I think it's a shared experience that is important.
Great.
Sorry, maybe
Thank
you could not hear me.
We could, but we could also hear the announcements that
Right,
give
sorry.
another perspective of what we're missing by not being in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
But so Prateek and Priyanka, we had a discussion about Delhi, and I thought what you mentioned then was incredible. I'd like if you could just touch on that.
Yeah. So new models, after a phone call from our colleague Roshni Vadera of Vadera Art Gallery, who's sort of picked up the phone to say, what do you think of doing a collaborative initiative? Something called In Touch was formed, which was our first collective online platform for Indian galleries. In the first episode of it, we are now on episode 7. It was Indian and UAE based galleries, but later on quite focused on Indian galleries, to have an online platform sort of to co-work to. It was fairly
rudimentary.
Yeah, it was fairly rudimentary in the beginning as we thought of it, but we really enjoyed the process, which then led to several such possibilities. One was a collaborative exhibition that we did at the Bikaner House, this beautiful building in Delhi, to create another collaborative exhibition amongst 4 galleries in India that was a little bit like our own art fair model, where the exhibitions were more meaningful, all curated by the presenting gallery, the space a lot more, also the building itself with so much more character, old heritage building, and then everything peripheral, the talks, the walkthroughs, the programming, everything that comes alongside building something like this happened by ourselves. So
that was last year.
That was last year. But yes, I do agree. I mean, there is no one or the other. Will we then just stick to such a model? No, I mean, we would do both. The art fairs bring a very specific sort of platform and possibility, and we like what that offers, even though there is fatigue because several of us do way too many art fairs within a year. What this year may teach us is to choose what works for us and create models that sustain this in a more meaningful way.
And to add to what Priyanka was saying, this year, in fact, at the India Art Fair, when it moved from January to April, and obviously it coincided with just after the opening of the Venice Biennial, and it also meant that there would be far few international visitors to the fair. We were all apprehensive a little bit because, we look forward to these groups by MoMA or the Tate, all these big institutions that come every year. But we realized that the art fair itself bolstered its own communication, went out on a limb to a larger, wider audience, and the support internally. And there were actually no museum groups from international, and there are no museum groups in India. So there were actually literally zero institutional groups coming in as this year's art fair. But the success of the fair was better than any other edition we've had, which goes to say that the local support of artists and the works that we show is incredible, and there's just a growing force. And we don't necessarily have to depend on, it could be case in point, but we don't necessarily have to depend completely or kind of an outside representation to have our own markets defined in a way. But yeah, so it's changing in that sense. But yeah, I think
Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. I mean, I think in sort of in closing, I'd like to sort of take one of the questions, but then combine it with what we had discussed previously. And that is, there was an anonymous attendee who said, what would each gallery prefer to leave behind in the past in terms of how the art world and the art markets operated before? But I think that could also be tied into, as things are gradually reopening, what lessons, tactics will carry through, and what's next for your gallery. Lorraine, if it's quiet in Hong Kong, I'll start off with you.
What's next for us, I think, is to stay being adaptable to situations. I think galleries have managed to do so very well. They adapt to different changes, and I think in our world today, it's hard to define what is exactly the future. But I think to be fully aware of what is happening, and to react in your own personal way is important, because I don't think different models necessarily work for each gallery well. And I think each gallery know better their own audience, and what are the advantages that they can grow with. So we are staying we're staying active as much as we can in Hong Kong. We are still doing art fairs that we're able to travel to. And so we're not changing so much our program in a sense. We want to stay as active as we want to. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. Jasdeep?
I think for me, it's the team. The team carried us throughout COVID, supported the artists, collectors. They kept the whole gallery running, and we need to consolidate and actually build on the team. The team is the gallery, and I'm increasingly realizing the importance of the people within. And COVID was a good indicator for me in which way which way the gallery needs to head towards the next few years.
Good. Thank you. And Prateek and Priyanka.
I think, Jim, your question was, what will we leave behind and what do we see forward?
Exactly.
I think we leave behind hasty travel. I think slow travel
Behind a treadmill.
Yeah. So I think slow travel, because there is no running away from the travel. As gallerists, this is something quite common. For our artists, we not need to be there. The core of the program is the artists, and wherever they are, we are. But slow travel is what we'll leave, go forward to, leave back hasty travel. And what is coming up for the gallery, I think it's intense. It's multiple locations, various new projects, lots of new is coming in, and a whole new, range of new signups of artists. Some great new solos are going to open across our locations in the different spaces. So we're very excited.
Yeah, and having said that, I also completely agree with what Lorraine said about being nimble and adaptable and light-footed to be able to make changes depending on the situations. We are fortunate to have, as Jasdeep was also saying, an incredible team, dedicated young people whose first motivation is towards our artists and to protect as well as to kind of facilitate their work. And that's what we look forward to. I think that's what we continue to do from the very beginning.
Right. I think, thank you. I mean, I know it for myself personally, one of the best changes has been moments and opportunities just like this. I mean, in the past, we would have had to have been in Hong Kong, would have had to leave everybody, go into a separate room to have this type of a discussion. And only the people that made that room at that time would have been able to benefit from the discussion. I think now we have these opportunities where we can get questions posed by people who are in their backyard, in their homes or in their offices, and able to present that, or who are able to go and see the discussion and learn from that at a future time. And so with that, I'd like to thank Art Basel very much for the opportunity to have the discussion with this esteemed panel. And I very much thank all the panelists and Art Basel for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
you.
Thank you Jim, for your time.
And thank you.
Thank you,
Basel team,
colleagues.
for
Yeah.
making it happen.